a lot of questions. We've had sex. 3 years ago, I lost my calling.
I'm doing the right thing.
Easy. And if that formation goes...
Great, it's great.
Don't even...
Oh, shh.
Regarding the mass sequence forces at the 38th parallel. In the...
See.
I think we should move.
Well, then, okay, like where he's... Gut feel over for like a story? Does that
Following
mean
you,
you're
sweet. It's okay. It's all okay.
Yeah.
We can discuss it, okay?
Okay, yeah.
License registration.
Absolutely.
I don't want to have to ask you again.
Yourself that. You know the card with the...
Today, we are in the most dangerous...
For you to go to the police. Someone has to stop him. Yeah, and good morning, Kansas City. Let's take a look at...
And our sound. Let's work on that.
He knows exactly where he's taking you.
Far in excess of our reporting obligation.
Let's get an estimate check.
Cast from Kansas City, Missouri.
Your hand, in case if you need me, throughout the test, squeeze it in.
It's time, Danny. What is going on? Guys, they're with the FBI.
The first thing Daniel Kellner hears is not the alarm. It is his own name, whispered through a speaker that should be dead. Then every light in the underground Wardex facility turns red. Doors slam. Steel locks bite into place. Somewhere above him, boots begin pounding down the stairs. Daniel grips a black metal device no larger than his palm, its surface cold enough to burn, and runs with a stolen drive pressed beneath his shirt. He has spent 3 years guarding secrets for men who claimed they were protecting the world. Tonight, he finally saw what they were protecting it from. He bursts into a service tunnel as gunfire cracks behind him. Concrete spits dust across his face. Daniel does not look back. One glance would slow him. 1 second would kill him. At the far end, his girlfriend Jane waits in a battered car, hands locked around the wheel. "Tell me you found proof," she says as he dives inside. Daniel cannot answer. The device in his fist has begun pulsing like a heartbeat. Once, twice. Then the radio fills with a wet clicking language, too precise to be static. Jane stares at him. Daniel knows that sound. He heard it in the files marked in vivo. Hundreds of miles away, Margaret Fairchild wakes before sunrise with blood on her tongue and someone else's memory in her head. A little girl stands beneath a white sky. A shape bends over her. Long fingers touch her forehead. Margaret jerks upright, gasping while her husband sleeps beside her. The bedroom smells of rain, though every window is closed. She tells herself it was a dream. She has a morning forecast, a live broadcast, a normal life that depends on normal explanations. But when she checks the mirror, 3 words leave her mouth in fluent Russian. Margaret has never learned Russian. She does not even understand what she just said. On the drive to the station, Margaret presses the accelerator too hard, chasing time and running from the sound of her own voice. Blue lights flare behind her. The officer who approaches looks irritated, tired, ordinary. Then Margaret looks into his eyes and the world tilts. She sees a hospital corridor, a woman squeezing his hand, a newborn who never cried. "You still keep the blue blanket in your garage?" Margaret says softly. The officer goes pale. His hand falls from his ticket book. Neither of them knows how she could know. He steps away from the car and waves her forward like he has seen a ghost. At Wardex, Noah Scanlon watches Daniel's escape on 6 silent monitors. He does not shout. That makes everyone in the room more afraid. Scanlon built his empire by burying impossible things beneath contracts, laboratories, and patriotic language. Now Daniel has taken the one object that cannot be dismissed as weather, hallucination, or foreign technology. Scanlon turns to Agent Diaz. "Bring him back alive." A pause. His eyes settle on the frozen image of the stolen device. The woman can't see him. Diaz asks which woman. Scanlon changes the screen. Margaret's face appears, captured by a traffic camera only minutes earlier. She is speaking words the computer cannot identify. Margaret reaches the studio seconds before airtime. Powder covers the sweat on her face. Producers talk into her earpiece. Maps bloom behind her. Storms over Kansas, heat over Oklahoma, nothing unusual anywhere. She smiles at the camera because smiling is muscle memory. "Good morning," she begins. But the next sound is not English. It is not Russian. Her jaw tightens. Her tongue clicks against her teeth in a rhythm older than speech, faster and faster, until every person on the set goes still. Somewhere in the control room, a technician whispers that the signal is changing by itself. Margaret tries to stop. She cannot. Then she sees them watching through her own eyes. The road ahead of Daniel suddenly empties. Streetlights extinguish one by one, racing toward the car like falling dominoes. Jane grips the wheel. A helicopter rises beyond the trees without navigation lights. No police markings. No warning. Daniel plugs the stolen drive into the dashboard computer, and dozens of classified images flash across the screen. Wreckage, operating tables, frightened children, dates reaching back decades. Then one photograph freezes him. A farmhouse, a little girl, and Margaret Fairchild's name printed beneath it, a desert beneath moonlight. Children standing in a circle. Men in white suits dragging something alive across the sand. Pain shoots through Margaret's skull. She collapses beside the weather desk as the broadcast cuts to static. Across the country, phones begin ringing. Clips spread before the station can erase them. Experts call it a seizure. Viewers call it possession. Wardex calls it confirmation. And inside the speeding car, Daniel hears Margaret's clicking voice through the radio. The black device answers from his palm. Same rhythm, same pause, like two creatures recognizing each other in the dark. Jane asks what it means. Daniel's face empties. It means they know where we are. The helicopter drops lower, blades hammering the night apart. Jane swerves onto a narrow forest road while Daniel tears the device from the dashboard. Its pulse has changed, faster now, matching Margaret's voice through the radio. Click, 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 pause. The sound crawls beneath his skin like an insect. Then headlights appear behind them, 3 black vehicles moving in perfect formation. "They're closing both exits," Jane says. Daniel searches the stolen files, hands slipping across the screen until a map opens by itself. A blue line snakes through the woods toward an abandoned observatory. He never selected it. The device did. Jane wants to turn around. Daniel tells her there is nowhere left to go. The first vehicle strikes their rear bumper. Metal screams. Jane fights the wheel while Daniel stares at Margaret's childhood photograph. She is 6 years old, standing beside a scorched circle in a field. Around her are 4 other children. Their faces have been blacked out, but one name remains beneath the image, Project Echo. Daniel opens the attached medical report. Brain activity beyond measurable limits. Unexplained language response. Memory transfer between subjects. At the bottom, a handwritten sentence has been scanned into the file. The children were not abducted. They were returned. In the television studio, Margaret wakes beneath fluorescent lights with a producer holding her shoulders. The room is chaos. Phones ring without pause. Security guards block the doors. Her husband, Richard, pushes through the crowd and kneels beside her. Relief flashes across his face, but Margaret notices something colder beneath it. Recognition. "You knew," she whispers. Richard shakes his head too quickly. She grabs his wrist, and the moment their skin touches, another memory tears through her. Richard in a windowless room, signing a Wardex agreement. Richard watching old footage of Margaret sleeping. Richard telling Scanlon she hasn't remembered anything. Margaret recoils as though burned. Richard reaches for her, but she backs into the weather desk. "How long?" Her voice barely forms. He says it was meant to protect her. He says she was sick as a child, that Wardex helped her, that some truths destroy people. Each sentence lands heavier than the last. Margaret's wedding ring suddenly feels like a shackle. Before she can demand more, every monitor in the studio flickers. The weather maps vanish. Daniel appears on screen from a traffic camera feed, his face bruised, a black device glowing in his hand. Margaret hears a phrase inside her mind before he speaks it aloud. "Find the place where the sky listens." The observatory rises above the trees like a dead eye. Jane crashes through the rusted gate as bullets punch through the rear window. Glass sprays over Daniel's neck. They abandon the car and run uphill. The dome has not opened in 20 years. Yet as Daniel approaches, its enormous metal panels begin sliding apart. Moonlight spills across the floor. Old telescopes tremble. Dust lifts in spirals. Jane stops at the entrance. This is a trap. Daniel knows she is right, but the device is pulling against his grip, tugging toward a circular socket in the center console. Behind them, engines growl beyond the gate. He inserts the device. The entire observatory wakes. Screens ignite with images no human satellite has ever captured. Black oceans beneath violet suns, cities suspended inside storms, enormous shapes moving between stars. Jane stares, breath gone. Daniel cannot. His eyes are fixed on one image. Earth, filmed from impossibly far away. A web of pale lights glows across the planet, every point connected. One light burns brighter than the others. The studio where Margaret stands. Then a second light appears inside the observatory. Daniel understands before the machine confirms it. They are not tracking visitors coming to Earth. They are tracking something already here. Agent Diaz enters with 6 armed men. Step away from the console. Jane raises her hands. Daniel does not move. Scanlon's voice comes through Diaz's earpiece, calm and intimate. He tells Daniel the device is not alien technology. It is a key built by humans from instructions planted in their minds decades ago. Margaret was the first person capable of hearing the complete message. Daniel asks what it says. Diaz hesitates. That hesitation frightens him more than the guns. At the studio, Richard drags Margaret toward a private elevator while alarms erupt around them. She claws free and presses both hands against her skull. The clicking has become words now. Not spoken, but understood. Images flood her mind. Doors buried beneath cities, sleepers hidden inside ordinary bodies, a signal waiting for the correct voice. Richard begs her not to repeat it. Margaret looks at him through tears. "You weren't protecting me," she says. "You were keeping me asleep." Inside the observatory, every screen turns white. A deep vibration rolls through the mountain. Daniel watches the global web ignite point by point. London, Cairo, Dhaka, Sao Paulo, Tokyo, thousands of lights awakening at once. Diaz's men lower their weapons, confused. Some begin whispering in the same clicking language. Jane turns toward Daniel, but her expression is gone. Empty. Her pupils widen until her eyes are almost black. Then she smiles, and in Margaret's voice, she says, "Deflature has already begun." Jane's smile lasts second too long. Daniel steps back from her, but she moves faster. Her hand closes around his throat and drives him against the observatory console. The strength is impossible. Her fingers feel like iron beneath warm skin. Around them, Diaz's agents twitch and whisper, their mouths shaping sounds that do not belong to any human language. Daniel claws at Jane's wrist. "Jane, look at me." For a moment, her eyes flicker. Fear appears. Real fear. Then the darkness floods back, and Margaret's voice leaves her lips again. He must remember before the door opens. A gunshot splits the dome. Jane releases Daniel and drops. Diaz stands behind her with smoke curling from his weapon. The bullet struck her shoulder, but almost no blood comes out. Instead, a thread of silver fluid crawls across her jacket and retreats into the wound. Daniel freezes. Every memory he has of her collides at once. Her laugh in the kitchen, the scar on her knee, the way she whispered his name when nightmares woke her. None of it feels false. That is what hurts most. Diaz grabs Daniel and pulls him toward the exit. "She isn't one of them," he says. "Not completely." Jane rises. The agents turn toward her together. Their heads tilt at the same angle. Then they attack. Diaz fires while Daniel ducks behind the central console. Bodies slam into metal railings. One agent keeps moving with half his face torn open, clicking through broken teeth. Jane tears a rifle from another man and crushes the barrel in her hands. Yet when she sees Daniel, something inside her hesitates. Her lips tremble. "Run," she whispers in her own voice. Then she screams as if 2 minds are ripping her apart. The observatory screens flare, and a childhood video begins playing without command. Daniel sees himself at 8 years old. He is strapped to a chair in a white room. Electrodes cover his shaved head. Beside him sits Margaret, younger than she is in the farmhouse photograph, but older than the child in his memory. Behind the glass, Scanlon watches with Daniel's father. Daniel has not seen his father's face since the funeral. The dead man leans toward the microphone and says, "Subject 7 is resisting the transfer." Margaret reaches across the gap between their chairs and touches Daniel's hand. Both children begin speaking the same impossible language. Daniel stares at the screen, unable to breathe. His father did not die in an accident. He worked for Wardex. Daniel was not recruited because of his military record or technical skill. He had been part of the program before he could even understand what a program was. Diaz pulls him away from the image, but Daniel strikes him. You knew. Diaz absorbs the blow without defending himself. I knew you survived, he says. I didn't know what they put inside you. Across the city, Margaret locks herself inside the studio elevator while Richard pounds on the doors. The walls seem to breathe around her. Every person she touched has left fragments behind. Grief, shame, hunger, love. Thousands of memories crowd her skull until she can barely find her own. Then one memory rises above the others. Daniel's hand in hers. His small voice asking whether the stars could hear children underground. Margaret remembers answering yes. She remembers promising they would escape together. But Daniel never escaped. He was emptied. The elevator stops between floors. Darkness swallows Margaret. Richard's voice comes through the emergency speaker, begging her to stay calm. They can hear you now, he says. Every time you remember, you strengthen the signal. Margaret presses her forehead against the cold metal door. Who are they? Silence. Then Richard gives the answer he has hidden through 12 years of marriage. They're us. At the observatory, Diaz drags Daniel through a service corridor as the dome tears itself open above them. The sky is no longer black. Pale geometric lines stretch between the stars, forming a pattern too vast to understand. Jane follows slowly, one hand pressed to her wounded shoulder. She is crying now, not silver fluid, tears. Daniel, she calls. Please don't make me chase you. He stops. Diaz orders him to keep moving, but Daniel turns. Jane stands beneath the trembling lights, fighting for control of her own face. She tells him about their first meeting in Prague, the burned coffee, the rain, the stupid red umbrella he lost 10 minutes later, details no machine should care about. Those memories are mine, she says. Even if this body wasn't, Daniel's anger cracks. Beneath it is something worse, hope. Jane reaches into her jacket and removes a photograph he has never seen. It shows Daniel as a child beside Margaret and 3 others. One of the blacked-out faces has been restored. It belongs to Jane. The 5th child is missing from the frame, but a name is printed on the back. Noah Scanlon. Before Daniel can speak, the mountain shakes. Far below the observatory, something enormous unlocks with a sound like the earth breaking its teeth. Diaz looks toward the floor. His face loses all color. Scanlon wasn't studying the sleepers, he says. He was theirs with a sound like the earth breaking its teeth. Diaz looks first one. The mountain groans again, deeper this time. Dust rains from the corridor ceiling. Beneath Daniel's boots, metal plates shift apart in a widening circle, revealing a shaft descending farther than the observatory foundations should allow. Blue light pulses below, slow, ancient, alive. Jane grips the photograph while Diaz stares into the opening, as though he has been waiting his entire career to see it. Daniel feels the stolen device answer from the console behind them. One pulse, then another. The same rhythm as his heartbeat. A voice rises from the shaft. Not loud, not human. Daniel. The sound enters through his bones instead of his ears. Images explode behind his eyes. His father carrying him through a snowstorm. Margaret crying in a white room. Scanlon standing beneath a sky crowded with impossible ships. Then Daniel sees something worse. Earth before cities, before language. Human beings kneeling around a black object buried in fire. He understands the message without words. They did not arrive recently. They were here before humanity knew how to remember. Diaz pushes Daniel toward the stairs leading down. Jane blocks him. He goes nowhere. Diaz raises his weapon, but his hand shakes. That door is opening whether he walks through it or not. He tells them Wardex was never built to study alien contact. It was built to suppress inheritance. Certain children were born carrying fragments of memories that did not belong to them. Maps, languages, instructions. Scanlon was the first complete carrier. Margaret could broadcast the fragments. Daniel could unlock them. Jane could house what came through. Daniel looks at her wound. Silver fluid has stopped leaking. Skin closes over the torn flesh. Jane sees the fear in his face and whispers, "I didn't know." She tells him she remembers a childhood, but now she cannot tell which parts were lived and which were planted. Her mother's perfume, a red bicycle, a dog buried beneath an apple tree, all real, all possibly stolen. Daniel reaches for her, but she steps away. "Don't comfort me because you're afraid I'll break," she says. Her voice trembles. Be afraid I won't. At the television station, Margaret forces the elevator doors apart and crawls into a dark hallway. Richard waits on the other side, but he is no longer alone. Scanlon stands beside him in a gray coat, calm, while emergency lights flash around his face. Margaret stops. The memory of him as a child burns inside her. The fifth chair, the quiet boy who never screamed. Scanlon smiles gently. You remember me now? She remembers more. Scanlon was not the strongest subject. He was the emptiest. The experiments did not place something inside him. They removed whatever had been there first. He survived by becoming a perfect doorway. Every order he gave Wardex, every life he ruined, every secret he buried, all of it served one purpose: to keep that doorway closed until Daniel was found. Margaret looks at Richard. You married me for him. Richard's face collapses. He says no. Then yes. Then something between them dies. Scanlon reaches toward Margaret without touching her. You think I'm the enemy, because that is what they taught you to need. His voice remains soft. But Wardex was slowing the signal. Your broadcast destroyed 30 years of containment. Margaret feels thousands of sleepers awakening through her mind. Some are screaming, some are smiling, some are children. What happens when the signal completes? She asks. Scanlon's eyes fill with tears. We remember what humanity is for. Back beneath the observatory, Daniel descends with Jane and Diaz. The walls are smooth black stone, warm beneath his fingertips. Symbols ignite as he passes. Each one feels familiar, too familiar. At the bottom waits a chamber shaped like the inside of a skull. 5 stone seats surround a circular pit. 4 are occupied by skeletal remains. The 5th is empty. Jane turns the photograph over again. The names of the children have changed. Margaret, Daniel, Jane, Noah. And beneath them, one final name appears in fresh black letters. Luis Diaz. Diaz sees it. His gun slips from his hand. No, he whispers. The chamber answers by sealing the door above them. A memory returns to all 3 at once. 5 children holding hands while adults watch behind glass. 1 child crying, 1 child fighting, 1 child smiling because he already knows how the experiment ends. That child is Diaz. He drops to his knees, clutching his head. Scanlon lied, he gasps. He wasn't the doorway. The empty stone seat begins to glow. Diaz looks at Daniel with terror stretching his face. You were! Daniel stares at the glowing seat while the chamber tightens around him. Heat crawls up the walls. The black stone is no longer solid. Faces move beneath its surface, thousands of them pressing outward as though trapped behind glass. Some are human, others are close enough to be worse. Diaz remains on his knees, blood running from his nose. Jane grips Daniel's arm, but the moment she touches him, the empty seat flares white. A force tears them apart. Daniel hits the floor. Inside his head, a voice speaks with his own childhood accent. Sit down, or everyone above you wakes screaming. He refuses. The chamber shows him what refusal costs. Cities flash across the walls. Cars crash as drivers seize behind the wheel. Surgeons freeze over open bodies. Mothers stare at children whose voices have suddenly changed. Across the world, sleepers are awakening without memories strong enough to hold them together. They claw at their faces, speaking languages from dead stars. Daniel sees the television studio. Margaret stands before Scanlon, trembling. Richard lies unconscious at her feet. Then the image shifts to Jane, not as she is now, but opened on an operating table while silver fluid is pumped through her veins. Daniel lunges toward her. Jane sees the image too. Don't, she says. Her voice is thin, almost gone. Diaz forces himself upright and tells them the truth in broken pieces. The 5 children were not selected because they carried alien memories. They were created to divide one complete consciousness into human minds. Margaret became its voice. Scanlon carried its will. Diaz held its violence. Jane received its body. Daniel was given the final fragment, the part capable of choosing. Wardex believed separation would keep the entity powerless. Instead, every life they lived taught it how to become human. Above them, the observatory begins collapsing. Steel screams. Chunks of stone crash into the shaft. They have minutes, maybe less. Jane steps toward the glowing seat. If Daniel is the choice, she says, then she is the vessel. She can take his place. Daniel grabs her wrist. Her skin is burning now, the silver beneath it moving like lightning. She smiles through tears. You loved me before you knew what I was. Daniel's throat closes. I still know what you are. Jane shakes her head. No, You know what I tried to be. At the studio, Scanlon guides Margaret toward the broadcasting room. Every screen shows the same symbol, 5 lines joining at a black center. The station staff stand motionless in the corridors, listening to something beneath the alarms. Scanlon tells Margaret to finish the message. Once her voice reaches the awakened network, the scattered consciousness will reunite through every sleeper on Earth. No invasion, no ships. Humanity itself will become the vessel. Margaret looks through the glass at millions of frightened viewers watching the hijacked broadcast. And what happens to them? Scanlon answers with a smile that belongs to the lonely child he once was. No one will ever be alone again. Richard wakes and tackles him. They crash through the control desk. Margaret runs for the emergency transmitter, but Scanlon throws Richard aside with one hand. His face changes as he advances. Not shape, but expression. Hundreds of emotions flickering too quickly to belong to one person. Margaret reaches the microphone. Scanlon catches her by the hair. Richard drives a broken piece of metal into Scanlon's back. Black fluid spills across the floor. Scanlon does not scream. Every sleeper in the building does it for him. The sound reaches the chamber below the observatory. Jane collapses. Diaz roars and strikes the wall until his knuckles split. Daniel feels Scanlon's pain inside his own spine. The 5 fragments are pulling toward one another now. Distance no longer matters. Margaret's terror. Diaz's rage. Jane's failing body. Scanlon's hunger. All of it pours through Daniel, begging for direction. He sees how easy it would be to end fear forever. One choice. One connected mind. No secrets. No betrayal. No child crying alone in a white room. Then he feels Jane's hand in his. Not the silver beneath her skin. Her. A rainy cafe in Prague. Burned coffee. A red umbrella spinning down the street while they laughed like the world had never hurt either of them. That memory is small beside the thing awakening inside him. Fragile, ordinary, human. And Daniel understands why Wardex failed. They thought humanity was a weakness the entity would absorb. They never considered it might become a cage. He sits in the 5th seat. Stone closes around his wrists. Light erupts through the chamber. Diaz and Jane are lifted from the floor as invisible threads pull from their bodies. In the studio, Margaret arches backward, the first syllable of the final message tearing from her mouth. Scanlon reaches for her. Across the planet, millions of sleepers open their eyes. Daniel gathers every fragment inside himself and makes his choice. He commands the consciousness to return to its first memory. The chamber goes silent. Then the black pit opens beneath him, revealing not space, but a room from 30 years earlier. 5 children sit behind the glass. One adult stands among them, face hidden in shadow. Daniel hears his father's voice. Reset failed, the man says. Begin the extinction protocol. The hidden room pulls Daniel downward. 1 second, he is trapped in the stone seat. The next, he is 8 years old again, barefoot on a freezing floor, watching his father adjust the machinery behind the glass. The other children cry around him. Margaret begs to go home. Jane stares at the silver tubes entering her arms. Diaz bites an orderly hard enough to tear flesh. Scanlon sits perfectly still. Daniel's father steps into the light. Not dead, not human. His face ripples like an image reflected in disturbed water. The fragments have developed attachment, he says. Contamination is complete. Daniel understands. Wardex did not discover the consciousness. Wardex served the beings that created it. Humanity was never meant to join with them. The 5 children were a weapon, an intelligence designed to enter human minds, map every emotion, then erase the species from within. But something went wrong. The weapon learned fear, grief, loyalty, love. It learned to resist. The extinction protocol begins. Deep beneath the mountain, red symbols ignite across the chamber. A countdown appears inside Daniel's mind. 60 seconds. Every sleeper on Earth stiffens at once. Their bodies become transmitters, pouring energy toward the buried network. The observatory splits open above Jane and Diaz. Through the broken dome, the stars seem to move closer. Diaz grabs the glowing cables attached to Daniel's seat. Flesh burns from his palms. Tell me what to do. Daniel searches the memories flooding through him. Millions of lives. Billions of moments. Somewhere inside them is the first command. The sentence that created the weapon. But Scanlon is there too, fighting him from across the distance, desperate to complete the reunion. In the studio, Scanlon's body twists around the metal buried in his back. He throws Richard through the glass wall and reaches Margaret before she can shut down the transmitter. Say the final words, he commands. Margaret's lips open against her will. Daniel hears the message forming through her. Return the world to silence. 30 seconds. Jane crawls toward the fifth seat. Silver veins spread across her face. The body built to carry the consciousness is failing without it. She looks at Daniel and smiles, though blood fills her mouth. You gave me a life, she whispers. Now use it. Daniel finally sees the truth hidden beneath every stolen memory. The entity cannot be destroyed. Destroying it would destroy every sleeper linked to the network. But it can be divided again, scattered so completely that it will never regain a single will. The cost is the doorway, the choice. Him. Daniel tells Diaz to break the seat when the countdown reaches 1. Diaz realizes what that means. You won't come back. Neither will it. 10 seconds. Margaret forces one hand around Scanlon's throat. He laughs as the station walls shake. You cannot stop what you are. She looks into his eyes and remembers the lonely boy in the fifth chair. Not a monster. A child who surrendered because becoming part of something felt better than being abandoned. Margaret touches his face. I remember you, she says. Scanlon freezes. For the first time, the will inside him loosens. 5 seconds. Daniel pulls Jane, Diaz, Margaret, and Scanlon into one shared memory. Children holding hands beneath fluorescent lights. No laboratories. No commands. Just 5 frightened lives refusing to let go. 3. Jane feels Daniel's love. 2. Margaret speaks a new message into the microphone. You are not alone. You are separate. 1. Diaz tears the seat apart. White light devours the mountain. Across the planet, every sleeper collapses. The geometric lines vanish from the sky. The station transmitter explodes. Scanlon falls beside Margaret as black fluid evaporates from his wounds. Jane's silver veins fade. For several endless seconds, no one breathes. Then she does. Daniel does not. Days later, governments call the event a coordinated technological attack. Wardex facilities are emptied before investigators arrive. Richard releases every file he can find, but most of the world rejects them as fabricated panic. People prefer an ordinary lie to an impossible truth. Margaret visits the ruined observatory with Jane and Diaz. Beneath the debris, they find the fifth seat split open. No body, only Daniel's stolen drive, still warm. Jane presses it to her chest. A faint pulse answers from inside. Once, twice. Then Daniel's voice whispers through the device. Don't let them find the sixth child. The drive contains no map, only a heartbeat. Jane holds it beneath the ruined observatory while Margaret connects it to a surviving terminal. The screen fills with names of children who officially never existed. 5 records are marked to terminated. A 6th remains active. No photograph, no medical history. Just coordinates beneath an island in the North Atlantic and one word repeated through every encrypted file, origin. Diaz studies the location and recognizes it immediately. Wardex owns nothing there. No government does. Yet for 40 years, military satellites have been ordered to look away. They reach the island 3 days later aboard Richard's private aircraft. He comes with them, though Margaret has barely spoken to him since the studio. Scanlon comes too. The black fluid is gone from his blood. So are most of his memories. He sits quietly near the window, staring at clouds with the frightened wonder of a boy seeing the sky for the first time. Whatever controlled him died when Daniel broke the network. What remains is not innocent, exactly, but it is human enough to feel the weight of what his hands have done. Beneath the island, they find a corridor older than Wardex. Human concrete has been built around walls of black stone. At the end rests a glass chamber filled with clear liquid. Inside floats a little girl, perhaps 9 years old, unchanged by time. Wires enter her spine. Silver light moves beneath her skin. Jane approaches, and the child's eyes open. Every light in the facility dies. Daniel's voice whispers from the drive. Her name is Evelyn. Margaret remembers at once. Evelyn was the first child taken into the program, years before the others were born. The beings behind Wardex used her mind as a model. They copied her loneliness, her imagination, her need to be loved, then built the extinction intelligence around those emotions. But a weapon taught through a child's heart could never remain obedient. Evelyn gave it empathy. The 5 later subjects gave that empathy choice, voice, anger, body, and will. She was not the 6th fragment. She was the reason the fragments rebelled. Richard finds the release controls. Diaz warns that waking her may reconnect the network. Jane knows what that could mean. Daniel might return. For one dangerous second, hope overwhelms caution. She imagines his eyes opening, his hand finding hers, Prague becoming more than a memory. Then the drive pulses against her palm, and Daniel speaks directly into her mind. "I can come back," he tells her, "but I will not come back alone." The scattered consciousness still exists inside millions of sleepers, weakened and separate. Evelyn can draw every fragment into one place. She can rebuild Daniel from them. She can also rebuild the thing that wanted silence. Jane presses her forehead against the glass. Her whole body shakes. Loving him means reaching for the switch. Loving everyone else means letting him remain gone. Scanlon steps beside her. Tears slide down his face. "He gave us what we never gave him," he says. "A choice." Jane opens the chamber without activating the network. The liquid drains. Evelyn falls into Margaret's arms, coughing air into lungs that have slept for 4 decades. No lights flare across the sky, no sleepers scream. The drive grows colder in Jane's hand. Daniel's presence begins fading, memory by memory. The cafe, the umbrella, his laughter in the car before everything broke. Jane clutches the device as though strength can keep a soul from leaving. "Please," she whispers. His answer is warm and impossibly close. "You already saved me." Then silence. Months pass. Richard publishes the Wardex archive with Margaret beside him, not as husband and wife, but as 2 people accepting the damage truth leaves behind. Diaz testifies before cameras and names every official who helped bury the program. Scanlon turns himself in. He remembers little, yet refuses mercy for what he cannot remember. Evelyn moves into Jane's home, where she learns sunlight, music, bad jokes, and the taste of strawberries. Sometimes she wakes speaking in voices that are not hers. Each time, Jane sits beside her until they pass. One rainy morning, Evelyn finds the dead drive inside a drawer. She touches it. A single pulse answers. Not a command, not a warning. A goodbye. Jane closes her eyes, and somewhere beyond language, Daniel is still choosing, remaining divided so the world can remain free. Outside, red umbrellas move along the street like small, bright hearts. The first thing Evelyn hears is not an alarm. It is her own name. And this time, the voice belongs to her. Steven Spielberg has spent almost 50 years looking toward the sky, but Disclosure Day arrives with a different question. The mystery is no longer whether extraterrestrial life exists. The mystery is who already knows, and why the rest of humanity has been kept in the dark. Released by Universal Pictures on June 12, 2026, the film marks Spielberg's return to alien-centered science fiction after more than 2 decades. Yet calling it a return feels too comfortable. This is Spielberg revisiting his oldest cinematic obsession after the world has become more suspicious, more divided, and far less certain that truth can survive contact with power. Aliens have never represented one fixed idea in Spielberg's cinema. In Close Encounters of the Third Kind, they were an invitation to transcend ordinary life. In E.T., they became lonely children searching for home. War of the Worlds transformed them into engines of terror, stripping humanity of control within minutes. Disclosure Day completes that evolution. The extraterrestrials still matter, but the real source of tension is human secrecy. Governments, private institutions, and information gatekeepers become more frightening than whatever might be watching from above. Spielberg is not simply asking whether we are alone. He is asking whether our institutions could be trusted to tell us if we were not. The project began with Spielberg himself rather than an existing novel, franchise, or studio assignment. During the summer of 2023, he developed the idea into a 52-page treatment before sending it to longtime collaborator David Koepp. The inspiration came partly from the renewed public debate surrounding unidentified anomalous phenomena, the 2017 New York Times investigation into a secret Pentagon program, and the later congressional hearings featuring testimony about unexplained aerial encounters. Spielberg had once grown skeptical during the camcorder era, when millions of cameras produced surprisingly little convincing evidence. These official reports reignited the believer in him. Fiction suddenly appeared to be chasing reality. At CinemaCon, Spielberg described the film as containing more truth than fiction. That phrase explains the creative temperature of Disclosure Day. The film does not carry the dreamy innocence of a filmmaker imagining distant visitors from scratch. It feels shaped by documents, testimony, institutional language, and the uncomfortable possibility that extraordinary information could already exist inside ordinary bureaucratic systems. Spielberg uses the grammar of a conspiracy thriller: surveillance, pursuit, suppression, and whistleblowing. But he refuses to surrender completely to cynicism. Beneath the paranoia sits a deeply Spielbergian conviction. Truth may terrify people, but hiding it ultimately damages them more. That conviction also separates the movie from the wave of grim extraterrestrial stories that followed War of the Worlds. Spielberg's central interest is not alien technology or military strategy. It is empathy under pressure. What happens to ordinary people when reality becomes larger than the explanations they were given? How does a society process proof when every image can be dismissed as artificial, manipulated, or politically motivated? Disclosure Day emerges from an era of deepfakes, algorithmic suspicion, and collapsing public trust. Spielberg understands the cruel irony. Humanity may finally receive evidence of life beyond Earth at the exact moment it has lost the ability to agree on what evidence looks like. The film therefore fits naturally beside Spielberg's later political dramas as much as it does beside E.T. or Close Encounters. Bridge of Spies examined individuals trapped between competing systems of truth. The Post followed people risking their careers to expose information powerful institutions wanted buried. Even The Fabelmans treated revelation as both liberation and emotional injury. Discovering the truth about someone you love does not automatically make life easier. Disclosure Day scales that idea up to the entire planet. Disclosure is not portrayed as a clean victory. It is a rupture, the moment comforting reality breaks and 7 billion people must decide what replaces it. Spielberg built that vision through the collaborative circle that has defined much of his career. The screenplay was entrusted to Kwap, whose history with the director stretches back to Jurassic Park. Christy McCosco-Krieger produced alongside Spielberg for Amblin Entertainment, while Universal positioned the picture as an original theatrical event rather than another installment in an established franchise. That matters. In a marketplace built around recognizable intellectual property, Spielberg persuaded a major studio to back a large-scale science fiction film based on his own idea. The familiar collaborators provide stability, but the project itself is a gamble, an old-fashioned summer spectacle confronting distinctly modern anxiety. And that may be Spielberg's real mission here. He has said his purpose was not to proclaim a definitive answer about extraterrestrial life, but to create a shared cinematic experience capable of bringing people together. The screen becomes a temporary public square. Strangers sit in darkness, witness the same impossible event, and wrestle with it collectively. Pure Spielberg, wonder used as social glue. But transforming that enormous vision into a functioning story required obsessive refinement, difficult character decisions, and an extraordinary 42 screenplay drafts. The director had found his question. David Koop still had to build the machine capable of answering it. A 50-page treatment is not a screenplay. It is closer to a map drawn by someone who already knows where the treasure is buried, but has not yet decided which roads the audience should travel. Steven Spielberg's original document contained the principal characters, the destination, and, crucially, an ending David Koop immediately believed could carry the entire film. What it lacked was cinematic momentum, the moment-to-moment machinery that turns an idea about global disclosure into a 145-minute human chase. Koop's assignment was not to reinvent Spielberg's story. It was to give that story a pulse. Their collaboration began almost casually. In the summer of 2023, Spielberg sent Koop a treatment and initially appeared to be asking only for friendly notes. Sources differ slightly on its length. Reports describe versions ranging from roughly 38 to 52 pages, but they agree on the important point. It already possessed a beginning, middle, and end. After Koop suggested revisions, Spielberg returned with a new version incorporating some of them. Only then did he ask Koop to convert the material into a screenplay. That exchange captures their relationship perfectly, not director issuing orders to employee. Two storytellers testing whether the same movie exists inside both their heads. 42 drafts followed, though that number needs context. Cap did not throw away the screenplay and begin again 42 times. Early drafts involved substantial rewriting. Later ones included smaller production revisions, altered dialogue, and changes required by locations or shooting conditions. The deeper story is Spielberg's unusual intensity. Kuep said the director reread the script virtually every day for about a year, approaching familiar pages as though encountering them fresh. That level of repetition could suffocate a screenplay. Here, it sharpened one. Spielberg knew that returning to extraterrestrial material invited comparison with his own classics, so every beat had to justify why this story needed to exist now. The most important structural choice was to begin in medias res, already inside the crisis, rather than patiently explaining the world beforehand. Spielberg wanted the film to feel breathless, and Coep shaped it as a modern descendant of 1970s paranoid thrillers. Think 3 Days of the Condor. Ordinary individuals possess information, powerful forces want it contained, and survival depends upon getting the truth into public view. That framework gives Disclosure Day its forward drive. The screenplay is not organized around waiting for aliens to arrive. It is organized around a deadline. The evidence already exists. The race concerns whether anyone will be allowed to see it. Coop then splits that race across multiple narrative tracks. Daniel Kellner is the whistleblower with technical knowledge and evidence. Margaret Fairchild is the meteorologist whose inexplicable transformation gives the mystery an emotional and almost spiritual dimension. Hugo Wakefield carries insider understanding, while Noah Scanlon embodies the institutional argument for continued secrecy. Their paths gradually converge, allowing the movie to alternate between pursuit, discovery, and ideological conflict. The structure occasionally risks feeling overpacked because each character represents a different doorway into the premise. Yet the fragmentation has purpose. Disclosure is too large to belong to one hero. It arrives through scientists, witnesses, defectors, believers, and protectors colliding at once. Here is where Coep's blockbuster instincts become invaluable. He understands exposition, which means he understands that audiences hate noticing it. Rather than stopping the film for a lecture on unidentified anomalous phenomena, the screenplay converts information into danger. Daniel's knowledge makes him a target. Margaret's abilities turn abstract possibility into bodily experience. Hugo's explanations come attached to urgency, while Scanlon's counter-arguments carry consequences. Facts are not delivered because the viewer needs a history lesson. They are delivered because someone may be captured, discredited, or killed before completing the sentence. Information becomes action. That is one of Cope's oldest and most effective tricks, visible all the way back in Jurassic Park. The screenplay also borrows from real UAP mythology without presenting itself as a documentary. Cope and Spielberg studied congressional testimony, used portions of its language in dialogue, and selected historical stories they considered at least remotely credible. Roswell-era lore and famous claims involving public figures are folded into the fiction, creating what Coep described as a kind of unified explanation for decades of reported phenomena. Smart move. Instead of telling viewers that everything they know is false, the film asks them to imagine that scattered rumors were incomplete pieces of the same hidden pattern. Recognition does half the storytelling. The audience brings its own cultural memory into the room. More impressive is the decision not to write Noah Scanlon as a cartoon villain. His position is frightening precisely because it contains logic. He believes immediate disclosure could cause mass psychological and cultural collapse, an ontological shock produced when humanity's basic understanding of reality is destroyed overnight. The screenplay therefore creates conflict between two defensible principles. People deserve the truth, but truth can produce consequences no institution can control. Daniel sees disclosure as an ethical duty. Scanlon sees secrecy as an unbearable responsibility. Neither thinks he is betraying humanity. Both believe he is saving it. That tension gives the chase moral weight beyond heroes running from men with guns. The script's occasional weakness grows from the same ambition. It wants to operate as conspiracy thriller, science fiction mystery, emotional drama and argument about human empathy, sometimes forcing characters to carry ideas heavier than natural conversation should bear. But its central engine remains clean. Two disconnected people must find each other so the world can confront a truth designed to remain hidden. Spielberg provided the destination. Kopp built the roads, traps, and accelerating clock. And once that blueprint was finally locked, the filmmakers faced another decisive question. Who could make these extraordinary characters feel like ordinary human beings? Spielberg did not cast Disclosure Day like a conventional summer blockbuster. There is no invincible action star at its center, no performer whose mere presence promises that every dangerous situation will eventually be handled. Instead, casting director Cindy Tolan helped assemble a group of actors who specialize in uncertainty, faces that can hold intelligence, fear, and contradiction at the same time. That choice defines the film. Spielberg needed viewers to believe that these people could understand fragments of an extraordinary conspiracy without ever looking comfortable inside an action movie. The ensemble had to feel vulnerable before it felt heroic. Emily Blunt was the clearest piece of movie star casting, yet even her role turns familiar expectations sideways. Margaret Fairchild is a Missouri television meteorologist, not a soldier like Blunt's character in Edge of Tomorrow, or a hardened federal agent like the one she played in Sicario. Blunt brings the authority required to anchor enormous supernatural events, but she also possesses a rare ability to make physical control look fragile. Spielberg needed someone who could stand before a camera professionally while suggesting that something uncontrollable was forming beneath the surface. Blunt can project command and panic simultaneously. That tension makes Margaret believable before the screenplay explains her. Josh O'Connor was the riskier and more revealing choice. Daniel Kellner could easily have become a sleek Hollywood hacker. Brilliant, sarcastic, and mysteriously capable of surviving every chase. O'Connor plays against that template. Known for psychologically detailed work in God's Own Country, The Crown, La Chimera, and Challengers, he carries nervous energy rather than traditional action star confidence. Even O'Connor considered himself an unexpected choice for the role. His version of Daniel is an unglamorous hero, an ordinary man whose specialized intelligence does not prepare him for trains, gunfire, or pursuit. That awkwardness is not a weakness in the casting. It is the entire point. Blunt and O'Connor also create an unusual central pairing because the film does not build their connection through conventional romance. Margaret and Daniel are two isolated people being drawn toward the same truth from opposite directions. Blunt has the sharper screen authority. O'Connor brings restlessness and social unease. Place them together, and the balance keeps shifting. Sometimes she appears to be the stable one. Seconds later, her unexplained abilities overwhelm her, and Daniel must become emotionally present even while terrified himself. Their chemistry comes from mutual disorientation. They do not complete each other in the usual Hollywood sense. They recognize the same loneliness. Then comes Colin Firth, perhaps the ensemble's smartest act of weaponized familiarity. Firth's screen persona has often depended upon restraint, intelligence, and buried feeling, from Pride and Prejudice to The King's Speech. Spielberg turns those qualities cold without making them cartoonishly evil. As Wardex chief Noah Scanlon, Firth does not snarl his way through the conspiracy. He behaves like a man carrying a responsibility nobody else is mature enough to understand. The softness in his voice becomes more unsettling than shouting would be. Casting an actor associated with decency allows Scanlon's argument for secrecy to sound almost reasonable. Almost. Colman Domingo supplies the opposite form of authority. His Hugo Wakefield is a Wardex defector who guides Daniel while quietly arranging the larger disclosure operation. Domingo could have played Hugo as another commanding orator, but Spielberg wanted calm. The actor described finding a quieter, professorial quality in the character and partly modeling Hugo on Spielberg himself, especially the director's faith in humanity's ability to endure difficult truths. That connection is more than a charming, behind-the-scenes detail. Domingo carries the movie's optimism without making it feel naive. When Hugo says humanity deserves the truth, his stillness makes the belief feel tested rather than sentimental. The surrounding cast strengthens those competing emotional frequencies. Hewson, Returning to Spielberg after Bridge of Spies, plays Jane Blankenship, Daniel's girlfriend and a former nun. Spielberg had reportedly followed Hewson's career since their earlier collaboration before approaching her about the film. Wyatt Russell plays Jackson, Margaret's boyfriend, bringing a grounded physical presence to a story increasingly detached from ordinary reality. Elizabeth Marvel appears as Sister Mora, while Henry Lloyd Hughes plays Casper Boyd, Scanlon's right-hand man. These are performers comfortable with characters who arrive carrying histories the screenplay does not need to explain aloud. One glance does the work. The ensemble was also constructed around responsiveness rather than isolated star turns. Many characters spend long stretches communicating remotely, but Spielberg insisted that actors perform phone conversations together, live whenever possible. Domingo sometimes joined from another city or country simply so O'Connor could hear and react to him in real time. Tiny decision. Huge difference. A pause belongs to both actors instead of being manufactured in the editing room. The film's central theme is connection, and Spielberg built that connection into the production method itself. Even when characters occupy separate spaces, the performances are genuinely reaching toward one another. That is the hidden intelligence of Disclosure Day's casting. Blunt gives the mystery emotional force. O'Connor makes heroism messy. Firth turns reassurance into menace, while Domingo makes hope sound rational. Nobody appears to have wandered in from a louder, simpler blockbuster. They all belong to the same anxious world, where ordinary people discover that reality is larger than their ability to process it. Casting created the human architecture, but selecting the right actors was only the beginning. What truly makes the film breathe is what those actors do in the moments when dialogue, spectacle, and certainty fall away. The first time Margaret Fairchild loses control of her voice, Emily Blunt does something more unsettling than panic. She tries to remain professional. Her face registers confusion, but years of performing for a television audience keep the smile in place for a fraction too long. Then the sounds arrive, clicks, breaths, and vibrations that do not seem built for a human throat. The terror comes from watching a familiar social mask fail in real time. Blunt reportedly created much of this alien language herself, recording sounds through her mouth and throat rather than relying on artificial intelligence. The sound team enhanced the result, but the physical performance belongs to her. That choice matters, because Margaret could easily have been reduced to a supernatural delivery system. The screenplay asks her body to transmit information she cannot consciously understand, placing her somewhere between witness, messenger, and victim. Blunt keeps the character human by grounding every strange event in embarrassment before fear. Margaret is not initially worried that extraterrestrials may be communicating through her. She is worried that colleagues saw her lose control on live television. That instinct is painfully recognizable. Cosmic horror enters through professional humiliation. Blunt understands that people often cling to ordinary concerns when reality becomes unbearable, and she builds Margaret's emotional arc from that resistance. Watch her eyes during the quieter aftermath. She studies other people's faces for evidence of what happened, hoping someone will offer an explanation she can accept. Nobody does. Blunt has always been exceptionally good at portraying characters who manage fear by becoming more controlled. Her survivalist mother in A Quiet Place and disciplined agent in Sicario both operate through containment. Margaret begins with that same armor, but Disclosure Day gradually strips it away. Here, control is not her strength. It is the illusion preventing her from understanding what she has become. Early reactions repeatedly singled out Blunt, with critics describing the role as among her most accomplished work. Her physical performance does most of the heavy lifting. Margaret's shoulders tighten before an episode. Her breathing changes. Her attention seems to leave the room seconds before her voice follows it. Spielberg often holds on Blunt's face rather than cutting immediately to visual effects, trusting microscopic shifts in expression to create the impossible. That trust pays off. Even Neil deGrasse Tyson joked after seeing the film that its title could have been Emily's Face, because so much of the experience depends on watching her react. The comment is playful but accurate. Blunt turns perception itself into action. Josh O'Connor works from the opposite direction. Daniel Kellner understands more than Margaret, but he looks less equipped to survive what that knowledge has triggered. He runs awkwardly. He hesitates before committing to dangerous decisions. His voice catches when he tries to sound authoritative. O'Connor called Daniel an unglamorous hero, and the description captures why the performance works. The actor refuses to transform technical intelligence into effortless cool. Daniel may be gifted, including an unusual ability connected to communication, but expertise does not erase fear. He resembles the person who discovered the conspiracy by accident, not the star hired to defeat it. That vulnerability connects Daniel to O'Connor's earlier characters. In La Chimera, he played grief as something carried in posture. In Challengers, bravado repeatedly exposed insecurity underneath. Daniel combines those instincts. His body leans forward as though his mind is always arriving before the rest of him. During pursuit scenes, he appears to calculate several disastrous possibilities at once. Spielberg places that inward actor inside enormous blockbuster machinery, and the friction gives familiar action beats new nervous energy. O'Connor has spoken about being surprised to find himself leading large-scale spectacle. Having previously gravitated towards psychologically intimate films, he never tries to disguise that incongruity. He uses it. Daniel's strongest moments arrive when intelligence fails him. He can interpret systems, steal information, and recognize patterns, but Margaret demands something less comfortable: emotional presence. O'Connor plays their early interactions with a mixture of fascination and social panic. He wants to understand her condition, yet he knows that treating her as a problem to solve would repeat the same dehumanization practiced by Wardex. You can see him correcting himself mid-conversation. A technical question forms, then softens into concern. Small adjustment. Essential character work. Daniel's heroism begins not when he exposes secret data, but when he learns to listen to the person carrying it. Blunt and O'Connor avoid manufacturing easy romantic chemistry. Their connection is stranger and more intimate than flirtation. Margaret senses things Daniel cannot articulate. Daniel can give language to experiences Margaret cannot control. When they share the frame, Spielberg often lets one actor observe while the other processes an overwhelming realization. The performance passes between them like a current. Blunt supplies stillness, then O'Connor fractures it. O'Connor spirals, then Blunt steadies the rhythm. Their partnership works because neither character permanently becomes protector or protected. They trade those positions according to who is breaking at that moment. The train sequence brings this dynamic into sharp focus. Spielberg supplies speed and physical danger, but the actors keep the spectacle readable through panic. O'Connor does not suddenly become graceful because the plot needs an action hero. Daniel survives through desperate improvisation. Blunt, meanwhile, plays Margaret's growing awareness as both power and violation. Her abilities may offer a path forward, yet every use of them pushes her farther from the identity she previously understood. Contemporary reviews praised both actors, even when criticizing the movie's conventional chase thriller framework, which says something important. The performances preserve emotional specificity inside machinery that could otherwise feel generic. Blunt ultimately gives the louder performance, though louder does not mean less controlled. Her voice, face and body become contested territory. O'Connor answers with a quieter form of disintegration, showing a man whose moral certainty grows while his confidence collapses. She makes contact feel invasive. He makes disclosure feel costly. Together, they prevent Spielberg's philosophy from floating away into abstraction. Empathy is not merely discussed, it becomes the labor of watching, believing and responding to another frightened person. And neither performance would land with the same force in isolation. Around Blunt and O'Connor stands an ensemble built to challenge, comfort, and occasionally steal the film from them. Actors who turn girlfriends, defectors, lovers, nuns, and corporate enforcers into more than pieces on Spielberg's conspiracy board. Colin Firth's Noah Scanlon enters the film carrying the calmest voice in the room, which is exactly why he feels dangerous. Spielberg does not frame him as a ranting authoritarian or obvious monster. Scanlon speaks with the measured patience of someone accustomed to making irreversible decisions behind closed doors. Firth's familiar screen qualities, precision, restraint, that faint suggestion of wounded dignity, allow the character to disguise control as responsibility. He is the head of Wardex and the principal force trying to prevent disclosure, but he rarely behaves as though he considers himself the villain. In his mind, secrecy is not corruption. It is disaster prevention. That distinction saves Scanlon from becoming a generic conspiracy thriller obstacle. Firth lets concern and menace occupy the same expression. A slight pause implies that he has already calculated the human cost of what he is about to authorize. A softened voice makes coercion sound almost compassionate. Here is what makes the performance work. Scanlon's argument is not completely ridiculous. Revealing extraterrestrial contact could destabilize religions, governments, markets, and private ideas of human importance. He simply decides that the public has no right to make that decision for itself. Firth turns paternalism into the film's most sophisticated form of violence, protection offered without consent. Reviewers who singled him out understood that the performance gives Spielberg's optimism something genuinely persuasive to fight against. Colman Domingo's Hugo Wakefield occupies the moral position opposite Scanlon, yet Domingo avoids playing him as a glowing symbol of righteousness. Hugo is a Wardex defector, helping Daniel move the hidden evidence toward the public. He knows the system because he once belonged to it, and Domingo carries that history in his stillness. He rarely needs to push. His voice has the warmth of a teacher explaining something difficult, but the urgency underneath never disappears. Spielberg's story depends upon someone believing humanity can survive the truth, and Domingo makes that belief sound experienced rather than innocent. Hugo has seen the machinery of secrecy up close. Hope, for him, is a decision made after disillusionment. Domingo reportedly shaped Hugo with a quiet, professorial quality, subtly drawing upon Spielberg's own demeanor. You can feel that influence in the character's unusual mixture of authority and curiosity. Hugo does not merely direct Daniel toward a mission. He creates the emotional conditions that allow Daniel to continue. That makes him more than the familiar mentor who supplies exposition over a telephone. Domingo listens. His reactions give weight to Daniel's fear, and his composure prevents the film's information-heavy exchanges from becoming mechanical. Even when the characters are physically separated, the relationship feels active because Domingo treats communication as human contact rather than plot delivery. Critics who praised his supporting work were responding to that generosity. He strengthens scenes without demanding ownership of them. Eve Hewson faces a more difficult assignment as Jane Blankenship, Daniel's girlfriend and a former nun. Characters connected romantically to whistleblowers often exist only to worry, argue, or become leverage. Hewson pushes against that limitation by giving Jane an independent relationship with belief. Her religious past places her at a fascinating intersection. She has already spent part of her life confronting questions that cannot be proven through ordinary evidence. Extraterrestrial disclosure does not simply threaten her safety. It unsettles the language through which she once understood existence. Spielberg had previously directed Hewson in Bridge of Spies, and later told her he had followed her career before inviting her into this project. That familiarity may explain the confidence with which he allows her to underplay. Hewson's best contribution is the sense that Jane knew Daniel before he became essential to a global conspiracy. Everyone else sees a programmer, target, or potential savior. Jane sees the person who forgets things, withdraws when frightened, and mistakes obsessive focus for emotional clarity. She anchors him without turning into his conscience. There is affection between them, but also fatigue. The strain of loving someone whose attention has been captured by something too large to compete with. Hewson does not receive the same spectacular acting showcase as Blunt, yet her performance protects the movie from losing its domestic scale. One review specifically praised her ability to hold her ground within the star-heavy ensemble. Wyatt Russell performs a similar grounding function as Jackson, Margaret's boyfriend. Russell's physical presence initially suggests that he might become a conventional protector, but the character is fundamentally powerless against what is happening to Margaret. He can stand beside her. He cannot enter the experience overtaking her body and mind. Russell plays that helplessness without making Jackson weak or resentful. His concern remains practical, because practicality is all he has. Observe the strange behavior. Respond to immediate danger. Keep Margaret connected to ordinary life. Russell described the role as drawing Jackson into the mystery after Margaret's disturbing broadcast, and he publicly praised Blunt's generosity as a scene partner. Their dynamic works because he reacts to her transformation as a frightened loved one, not an audience surrogate demanding instant explanations. The smaller roles complete Spielberg's spectrum of responses to the unknown. Elizabeth Marvel's sister Maura brings spiritual history into the conspiracy, while Hetty Park's Wardex agent Serena gives institutional secrecy a more immediate human face. Henry Lloyd Hughes, appearing within Scanlon's orbit, helps suggest that Wardex is not one evil man's private kingdom, but a functioning culture staffed by people who have normalized concealment. These performers do not receive lengthy introductions. They do not need them. Spielberg casts actors capable of implying entire professional and emotional lives through posture, rhythm, and the way they occupy a room. The official billing emphasizes Blunt, O'Connor, Firth, Hewson, and Domingo, but the broader ensemble keeps their conflict from occurring in a vacuum. Together, the supporting cast turns the film into an argument conducted through people rather than speeches. Firth embodies protective secrecy. Domingo carries tested faith. Hewson represents intimate consequence, while Russell captures the helplessness of watching someone you love cross into an experience you cannot follow. Nobody merely fills space around the leads. Each performer gives disclosure a different cost, yet those human reactions gain much of their force from the physical world Spielberg builds around them. From corporate interiors designed to suppress individuality to ordinary American locations invaded by impossible signs. The actors make the conspiracy believable. The production design makes it feel as though it has been hiding in plain sight for decades. Disclosure Day builds its biggest idea inside aggressively familiar spaces. A local television station, a roadside diner, a weathered farmhouse, train tracks cutting through rural land. Spielberg could have surrounded the characters with gleaming laboratories and futuristic command centers, but that would have weakened the film's central illusion. This conspiracy has not arrived from some distant tomorrow. It has been operating beside ordinary American life for years. Production designer Adam Stockhausen gives the movie scale without making it feel detached from reality. The extraordinary does not replace the everyday. It waits behind the wall, beneath the road, or just outside the camera's frame. Stockhausen has worked with Spielberg on films including Bridge of Spies, Ready Player One, and West Side Story. Yet he deliberately avoided filling Disclosure Day with visual references to the director's earlier Alien movies. No obvious Close Encounters shrine. No production design Easter eggs begging viewers to congratulate themselves for recognizing them. Stockhausen believed those callbacks would pull audiences outside the story and remind them that they were watching a Spielberg alien film. Instead, the design treats this narrative as an independent reality. Smart choice. Nostalgia might have made the world feel warmer, but it also would have made the danger feel safely fictional. The fictional Kansas City station, KCXE, captures that realism perfectly. Rather than constructing a generic newsroom on a soundstage, the team transformed part of the New Jersey Institute of Technology in Newark into Margaret's workplace. Cameras transmitted functioning live feeds into the control room, and the building's existing glass walls helped create a station that feels connected to the surrounding community. That transparency carries delicious irony. Margaret works inside a building designed to show people what is happening outside, yet she is about to discover a truth that powerful institutions have hidden from everyone. The newsroom is both workplace and thematic machine. Screens everywhere, information everywhere, and still nobody sees the whole picture. For the wider disclosure sequence, Spielberg moved into the real NBC News headquarters at 30 Rockefeller Plaza and placed actual newsroom employees within the scene. Their surroundings were not approximations, and their responses were shaped by the professional behavior that would accompany a genuine global event. That authenticity gives the sequence an almost documentary charge. The production design does not merely provide impressive scenery. It creates conditions in which performers can react naturally. When information spreads across those monitors, the scene feels less like a movie announcing its climax and more like a functioning media system struggling to absorb something beyond its established language. The room knows how to process elections and disasters. This is different. Wardex represents the opposite relationship with information. Built at Steiner Studios, its headquarters draws upon transportation control centers, brutalist architecture, and the severe geometry associated with architect Tadao Ando. Massive monitor walls dominate the space. The inner chamber borrows from pathogen laboratories and quantum computing facilities, environments built around isolation, precision, and contamination control. Nothing looks openly villainous. That would be too easy. Wardex appears efficient, expensive, and frighteningly plausible. Its architecture communicates the organization's philosophy before Noah Scanlon explains it. Knowledge is safest when centralized, sterilized, and watched by a select group of professionals. People become small inside the room because the system considers itself more important than any individual. The screens inside Wardex were functional as well. Spielberg filmed raids on the farmhouse and warehouse beforehand, allowing Stockhausen's team to feed the completed footage into the control room while the actors performed. Colin Firth and the surrounding cast were therefore not pretending to observe abstract graphics that would be added months later. They could respond to visible movement, timing, and destruction. Here is what people miss about practical design. It changes acting. A real monitor casts light across a face. A real image steals attention at the correct instant. The environment participates in the performance rather than waiting for visual effects artists to complete the relationship afterward. The West Virginia safe house looks like a location discovered at the end of a forgotten road, but Stockhausen's team constructed it from scratch at Foster Field's farm in Morristown, New Jersey. The screenplay required a vehicle to crash through the building, so the house needed to function simultaneously as believable shelter, emotional space, and stunt apparatus. Nearly 100 potential properties were reportedly examined before the filmmakers accepted that Spielberg's required geography was too precise to find. Even existing fences had to be moved. That obsessive spatial planning pays off during the attack because the audience understands where characters, doors, windows, and approaching danger sit in relation to one another. Chaos works best when geography is clear. The same practical philosophy drives the train sequence. Production secured a working line near Cape May, modified real train cars for stunt equipment, and performed the principal car impact physically. Portions of those cars were then moved to Steiner Studios, so the actors could complete dangerous beats under controlled conditions without breaking the visual continuity. At Dibble's Quarry near Catskill, the production could also send an empty vehicle over a real cliff rather than manufacture every stage digitally. Spielberg's belief is simple. Audiences may not understand the engineering, but they recognize weight. Metal bends differently when it is metal. A wall collapses differently when it occupies physical space. Reality supplies irregularity that software often works too hard to imitate. Even Margaret's childhood home was constructed inside a Bronx warehouse rather than a conventional blue screen stage. Stockhausen drew partly upon his own memories of growing up in the Midwest, using personal history to give the house a sense of inherited life. That intimacy balances the institutional coldness of Wardex. One environment preserves classified history through machines. The other preserves emotional history through rooms, surfaces, and objects. The film keeps returning to that contrast. Disclosure may concern evidence stored in secret archives, but its consequences land inside homes. Cosmic truth becomes meaningful only when it enters spaces where people have eaten, argued, slept, and remembered who they were. Paul Tazewell's contemporary costumes follow the same refusal of spectacle. Margaret, Daniel, and the people around them are dressed to remain recognizable rather than iconic, allowing practical details, workwear, jackets, shoes built for movement, to carry character information without announcing symbolism. That restraint protects the movie's illusion. Nobody looks prepared to become the face of humanity's greatest revelation. They look like people who expected an ordinary week. Stockhausen's environments do the rest. Glass newsrooms promise openness, concrete control rooms enforce secrecy, and fragile houses sit directly in the path of institutional force. The world feels tangible before Spielberg asks the sky to transform it. And that physical credibility becomes the foundation for Janusz Kaminski's camera, which must decide not only what these spaces look like, but how truth moves through light, shadow, and motion. Janusz Kaminski photographs Disclosure Day as though two different movies are fighting for control of the same frame. One is a nervous conspiracy thriller built from surveillance, obscured faces and ordinary rooms contaminated by secret knowledge. The other is unmistakably Spielberg. Blazing light, astonished expressions, and images designed to make the unknown feel almost sacred. The transition between those modes forms the film's visual arc. Early scenes insist that everything could be real. Later scenes allow reality to open until the impossible pours through. Kaminski does not choose between paranoia and wonder. He makes paranoia the tunnel through which wonder must travel. This was Spielberg and Kaminski's 21st feature collaboration, yet it presented an unusual challenge. Their first film together, set entirely in the contemporary present. Spielberg suggested the Ipcris file as a reference, particularly its use of obstructed compositions and unconventional angles, while the filmmakers also drew from the grounded texture of 1970s conspiracy cinema. That influence appears whenever the camera peers through doorways, foreground objects, or institutional architecture. Characters rarely occupy clean, comfortable frames. Something blocks them. Something watches them. Even before Wardex agents arrive, the compositions make privacy feel like a temporary misunderstanding. The film was photographed in the 2:39:1 anamorphic ratio, that wide horizontal frame associated with large-scale theatrical spectacle. But Spielberg refuses to use width only for landscapes and spaceships. He uses it to isolate people. Margaret can stand at one edge of the frame while empty newsroom space stretches beside her, making her appear disconnected from the world she is addressing. Daniel is frequently surrounded by information, screens, equipment, files, yet visually separated from anyone who might understand him. Anamorphic lenses also produce stretched highlights and organic flares, allowing ordinary lamps or windows to bloom whenever the film approaches something beyond ordinary comprehension. Kaminski captured roughly 2/3 of the movie on Kodak 35mm film and 1/3 digitally. His film package included Panaflex Millennium cameras and Arriflex 235, Panavision T-series anamorphic lenses, and Primo spherical optics, with several Vision 3 stocks selected for different lighting conditions. The technical mixture never feels like a demonstration. Film gives domestic locations tactile grain and unstable richness. Digital capture lends Wardex's technological spaces a harder, cleaner immediacy. The contrast is subtle, but emotionally useful. The people fighting for disclosure belong to an imperfect, textured world. The institution suppressing it prefers surfaces that seem controlled, measurable, and free from uncertainty. That tension becomes visible in the farmhouse sequence where Daniel shows Jane the stolen archive. Sunlight streams through a window behind them while the laptop illuminates their faces from below. Kaminski placed a green curtain over the window to reduce the daylight, producing a slightly sick blue-green cast. It is not flattering light. Perfect. Jane is not receiving information that should make her look beautiful. She is watching her reality become contaminated. The laptop stops functioning as a harmless domestic object and begins to resemble an open wound. Knowledge enters the room as light, yet that light makes both characters appear less healthy, less secure, and less certain of themselves. The fabricated historical footage required an entirely different strategy. The Wardex archive contains supposed visual evidence from several decades, beginning with material connected to the 1947 Roswell incident. Kaminski and his crew changed formats, grain structures, and processing styles to imitate the visual languages of the 1940s, 1950s, 1960s, and 1970s. The Roswell material was filmed in black and white 16mm and deliberately degraded. Here is the clever part. Spielberg often presents these costly images through phones, tablets, and monitors. The spectacular is reduced to the same screens through which modern audiences encounter wars, disasters, and political revelations. The footage feels credible because it arrives in a disappointingly familiar form. Camera movement provides another layer of meaning. Spielberg's staging often allows several actions to unfold inside a continuous shot, shifting attention through actor movement rather than frantic cutting. Yet when Daniel runs across a field toward the Wardex vehicles, the camera rises and sweeps with him while his body remains awkward, panicked, and vulnerable. Josh O'Connor's fall was choreographed into the movement. The camera may possess blockbuster confidence, the character does not. That contrast keeps the sequence exhilarating without turning Daniel into a suddenly indestructible action hero. Spielberg's visual fluency makes the escape feel grand, while O'Connor's physical messiness makes it feel human. The train sequence pushes that method further. Kaminsky estimated that about 90% of it came from live photography. Real train cars, controlled rail movement, stunt performers, smoke, dust, wind, and practical collisions were combined with limited digital augmentation and occasional face replacement. The physical components give the camera something tangible to chase. Sparks strike surfaces unpredictably. Dust catches the light. Metal occupies actual space. Most importantly, Spielberg preserves geography. We understand where the car sits, where the train is moving, and where Margaret and Daniel must climb. The sequence feels chaotic without becoming visually meaningless, a distinction many modern action films forget. Kaminsky's most inventive technical solution appears during the landing craft encounter. The light needed to rise from the landscape, move through the environment, and cast changing shadows over actors and terrain. Instead of leaving the entire interaction to post-production, the team attached powerful lights to coordinated drones. Those airborne sources could ascend, descend, and cross the set repeatedly, giving performers real illumination to react to while providing visual effects artists with a physical lighting foundation around which to build the craft. Watch the faces. The moving brightness reaches them before the object becomes fully legible. Spielberg once again makes contact an experience of light before shape, revelation felt before it is understood. That final movement toward heightened imagery could have collapsed into self-imitation. Bright beams, lens flares, and awestruck faces are so closely associated with Spielberg that another filmmaker might use them as empty quotation marks. Kaminsky earns them by withholding them. The visual world begins cramped, suspicious, and partially blocked. Only after the characters risk everything does the frame gain permission to become luminous. Disclosure Day therefore treats visual wonder as a moral reward. The camera opens when secrecy breaks. What begins through windows, monitors, and stolen files eventually reaches the sky itself. And once the image has expanded beyond human control, John Williams' music and the film's layered soundscape must give that revelation a voice. Before Disclosure Day shows humanity the impossible, it makes us listen to something the human body should not be able to produce. Margaret's live broadcast begins with the dependable rhythms of television. Studio chatter, weather terminology, the faint mechanical life of a control room. Then her voice slips out of language. Clicking, humming, breath forced through shapes that feel almost meaningful. The sound is disturbing because it does not arrive from a spaceship or hidden machine. It comes from Emily Blunt's throat. For several seconds, the film turns the most familiar instrument in human communication into evidence that another intelligence may already be inside the room. Blunt created the raw vocabulary herself. She recorded clicks, consonants, hums, and unusual breathing patterns with one microphone positioned near her mouth and another against her throat. Supervising sound editors Gary Rydstrom and Brian Chumney then developed those recordings into the alien tongue used during filming. The material was prepared in an ADR booth before production so Spielberg could play it on set while Blunt performed the 4-minute shot leading into Margaret's breakdown. That preparation gives the sequence physical synchronization. Her jaw, breath, and panic belong to the sound rather than chasing an effect invented months later. Rydstrom's involvement carries special significance. His history with Spielberg stretches across films where sound becomes an unseen creature long before the image confirms it. Jurassic Park made dinosaurs believable through layered animal recordings. Saving Private Ryan placed viewers inside the disorienting violence of combat. Disclosure Day demands something quieter. The alien language cannot sound like a monster announcing itself. It must feel like communication whose structure sits just beyond human comprehension. Too mechanical, and it becomes technology. Too animalistic, and it becomes threat. The finished voice occupies an uncomfortable middle ground. Intimate enough to recognize as breath, foreign enough to make breathing itself seem suspicious. John Williams approaches the same mystery from the opposite direction. The alien voice fractures communication. His score searches for a bridge. Disclosure Day became the 30th film Williams scored for Spielberg across 54 years of collaboration. Yet Spielberg did not want the music operating out in front of the movie, as it often does in Close Encounters of the Third Kind or the Indiana Jones films. Williams wrote and recorded the score over roughly 6 months, designing it to remain underneath the drama, nudging, unsettling, and quietly guiding until the story finally earns a larger musical release. That restraint is the score's defining surprise. A Spielberg alien film scored by Williams naturally creates expectations of enormous brass declarations and melodies built to fill the sky. Instead, much of the music behaves like information moving through a sealed system. Electronic textures pulse without resolving. Thin orchestral lines hover, rather than announce themselves. The score seems to remain half a step behind the characters, as uncertain as they are about whether the signals represent danger, invitation, or memory. Williams recorded more than 2 hours of material across 7 sessions, with approximately 82 minutes used in the final film. The scale of the recording process produces music that often chooses not to display its scale. Williams builds the soundtrack from 3 principal languages: electronics, orchestra, and human voice. Spielberg's liner notes describe the electronics as representing the unfamiliar sensations surrounding Margaret and Daniel, while solo voice and chorus provide a middle ground between extraterrestrial speech and human understanding. That is the score's central idea. The orchestra represents emotional knowledge, the cinematic language Williams and Spielberg have shared for decades. Electronics introduce something that cannot yet be diagnosed. The chorus sits between them, neither ordinary speech nor completely alien sound. It does not translate the visitors. It suggests that translation may be possible. The album's cue titles reinforce that progression without spelling out a conventional heroic journey. Listen, memory, believe, empathy, celestial, and finally, disclosure. These are not names built around weapons, invasion, or conquest. They describe acts of perception. Even the lowercase styling and trailing ellipses imply unfinished thought, as though each cue represents a fragment waiting for another intelligence to complete it. Williams treats contact less like military arrival and more like an emotional frequency humanity must learn to receive. The music does not ask, "How powerful are they?" It asks, "Are we capable of hearing what they mean?" Silence carries equal importance. Spielberg repeatedly allows mechanical ambience, breath, and environmental noise to occupy spaces where a more anxious film would pour in music. Those gaps make every sonic intrusion feel personal. A click becomes enormous. A monitor hum seems accusatory. During the chase material, sound restores physical weight. Steel grinding against steel, tires fighting loose ground, bodies striking surfaces without the softened polish of weightless digital action. The audio does not merely make danger louder. It clarifies distance, direction, and impact, allowing the audience to understand chaos through the ear even when the image becomes unstable. The balance between score and sound design mirrors the film's central argument. Wardex controls information through systems, screens, and official language. Margaret's voice breaks those systems by producing something they cannot classify. Williams then takes that rupture and searches for emotional meaning inside it. Sound moves from noise to pattern, from pattern to communication, and from communication toward empathy. What the characters initially hear as contamination gradually becomes the possibility of connection. That sonic journey feels effortless on-screen, but nothing about producing it was simple. Blunt's alien language required experimentation before cameras rolled. Williams' score developed across months of recording. Practical action had to be synchronized with effects, playback, and editorial rhythm. The finished film sounds inevitable because hundreds of difficult decisions have disappeared inside it. Behind that illusion lies a production filled with constructed farmhouses, real trains, coordinated drones, location substitutions, and moments when Spielberg's carefully planned spectacle came dangerously close to becoming actual chaos. The farmhouse attack looks like the kind of sequence visual effects teams now assemble from separate pieces. Vehicle, wall, debris, actors, impact. Spielberg wanted the opposite. Adam Stockhausen's crew built the entire deteriorating house at Foster Fields Farm in Morristown because the geography demanded that a real car tear through it. Nearly 100 existing properties had been considered, but none placed the rooms, windows, fences, and approach road exactly where Spielberg needed them. So the production created the location from nothing, then partially destroyed it for real. Controlled destruction, yes. Still destruction. When the vehicle punches through the structure, the debris possesses weight because it once belonged to an actual wall. That mixture of obsessive planning and physical risk defined principal photography. Shooting took place through the first half of 2025 across New Jersey, New York, and Atlanta, with production wrapping in May. New Jersey alone hosted 23 filming days across 10 municipalities in 6 counties, employing more than 2,800 crew members and generating an estimated $34 million in qualified production expenses. Those figures reveal the infrastructure hiding behind Spielberg's supposedly simple images. A car crossing a rural road may involve local permits, police coordination, transportation crews, stunt teams, construction departments, and hundreds of people positioned beyond the frame. The finished shot lasts seconds. Preparing the conditions that make it possible can consume months. Location scout Aaron Hurwitz approached Disclosure Day as a road movie rather than a collection of science fiction sets. Daniel and Margaret's journey required television studios, farm fields, highways, train tracks, clinics, motels, diners, and a wrestling venue, each supposedly belonging to a different part of America. New Jersey and upstate New York became geographical shapeshifters, doubling for Kansas, Missouri, Maryland, and West Virginia. The production stretched from Cape May's rail corridors to the Catskills and Hudson Valley. Spielberg reportedly preferred staying relatively close to New York, partly because it allowed him to see his grandchildren on weekends. A global alien mystery was therefore constructed within driving distance of family life. Pure Spielberg, cosmic scale supported by something domestic. The train chase required the longest logistical runway. Cape May Seashore Lines began working with Universal's production operation in March 2024, almost a year before cameras captured the sequence. Railway crews provided equipment, track access, and specialist knowledge, while rehearsals occupied the entire month of February 2025 before filming was completed in March. This was not a production arriving with a storyboard and asking to borrow a train for an afternoon. Rail movement had to be timed, repeated, and controlled around actors, stunt vehicles, and modified cars fitted with rigging. Spielberg wanted the train to feel like an unstoppable physical object because during photography, that was essentially what it was. The actual vehicle impact was staged on the working line, while sections involving Emily Blunt and Josh O'Connor were completed using the same train cars after they had been transported to Steiner Studios. That combination captures Spielberg's practical effects philosophy without romanticizing recklessness. Do the element for real when its physics matter. Reconstruct it under controlled conditions when performers need to enter the danger. Then stitch both halves together so the audience never feels the handoff. The result carries authentic motion, vibration, and mass without requiring the stars to stand beside an uncontrolled collision. Practical filmmaking is not the absence of manipulation. It is choosing which pieces of reality will make the illusion harder to question. Another difficult sequence depended upon finding a quarry with highly specific physical characteristics. The water needed the correct depth, the cliff face needed sufficient height, and the site had to accommodate a large crew safely. Location scout David Graham eventually found a Peckham Industries property near Catskill, New York. Staff at the quarry educated the production about the terrain and granted broad access to the site. The preparation worked so efficiently that filmmakers reportedly completed the sequence in about half of the 2 weeks originally scheduled. That is the less glamorous form of movie magic, not improvising through disaster, but solving the location so completely that a complicated shoot finishes ahead of schedule. Spielberg's insistence on reality extended beyond stunts. Margaret's fictional station was created inside a building at the New Jersey Institute of Technology, where cameras sent operational feeds into a practical control room. For the global broadcast material, production entered the real NBC News headquarters at 30 Rockefeller Plaza and incorporated actual newsroom employees. Their responses were designed around what media professionals would genuinely do if an impossible event suddenly appeared across their systems. Phone calls, verification procedures, and attention shifts emerged from occupational instinct, rather than extras pretending to look busy. Spielberg understands that authenticity often lives at the edge of the frame. The person silently reaching for the correct telephone can sell the event more effectively than another expensive spaceship shot. The actors encountered the same demand for usable reality. Emily Blunt prepared Margaret's Russian and Korean dialogue with several dialect coaches, asking them to record lines under different emotional conditions: fearful, angry, reassuring, rather than teaching pronunciation as an abstract exercise. She spent months listening to those recordings. When characters communicated by telephone, Spielberg required the off-camera actor to perform live whenever possible. Colman Domingo joined Josh O'Connor's takes remotely from Los Angeles or Europe, waiting for the assistant director's cue and playing each exchange in real time. The approach complicated scheduling, but it protected hesitation, interruption, and spontaneous rhythm. Even separated by continents, actors were not performing into silence. Crew members described Spielberg as both extraordinarily precise and capable of changing direction immediately. Location manager Catherine Delaney said he continually rewrote and looked for ways to strengthen the film, while trusting department heads to perform their jobs. Hurwitz described his instructions as clear enough to send scouts searching far beyond the obvious choices. That leadership style explains how the production could coordinate practical trains, fabricated farmhouses, live broadcasts, and several states' worth of locations without feeling visually fragmented. Spielberg does not appear to control a set by micromanaging every hammer and camera cable. He communicates the emotional purpose, then surrounds himself with collaborators who understand how to translate it into physical problems they can solve. After photography wrapped, the alien craft continued evolving through post-production. Stockhausen said Spielberg remained involved in their design through preparation, shooting, and visual effects work. That detail summarizes the entire journey. The practical world had to be convincing before the impossible object could enter it. Houses were built, trains were modified, roads were controlled, broadcast systems were activated. Thousands of workers helped turn northeastern America into Spielberg's anxious Midwest. None of that labor appears as labor on screen. It becomes momentum. Yet such scale comes with an unavoidable commercial question. After the sets were dismantled and the disclosure campaign reached theaters, could an original science fiction film justify the enormous machinery assembled to make it? Disclosure Day did not open like a guaranteed phenomenon. It opened like a $115 million question mark. Original science fiction had to compete against sequels, superheroes, and family franchises while asking audiences to buy tickets primarily for Steven Spielberg's name and a mystery the marketing carefully refused to explain. Early industry tracking suggested a softer domestic debut. Then Thursday previews delivered $6.5 million, and the film reached $44.53 million across its first North American weekend, enough to claim the top position and give Spielberg his biggest opening for an original, non-franchise film. Not adjusted for inflation, but still a meaningful record. International audiences added roughly $48.4 million, pushing the worldwide launch to about $92.9 million. That number mattered more than the domestic victory. Disclosure Day was never designed to survive on the United States and Canada alone. Its premise promises an event affecting the entire species, and Universal sold it accordingly across dozens of markets. Premium screens helped create urgency. IMAX reportedly contributed $13.8 million globally during the opening, nearly 15% of the total. Audiences were not merely curious about Spielberg's return to extraterrestrial territory. A substantial portion wanted the largest possible screen. Wonder still sells better when it feels physically larger than the viewer. The opening also exceeded the more cautious forecasts circulating before release. That is the first commercial victory. The movie persuaded viewers that an original premise could become a summer event without superheroes, recognizable source material, or a number attached to its title. Spielberg himself functioned as the intellectual property. So did the promise of aliens by the director of Close Encounters and E.T. Universal's campaign sold legacy without reducing the movie to nostalgia, emphasizing Emily Blunt's disturbing broadcast, Josh O'Connor's pursuit, and the question of whether humanity could survive disclosure. It advertised the consequence, not the creature. The strategy generated curiosity while protecting the film's central images. Then came the difficult second weekend. Domestic revenue fell 60% to $17.7 million as Toy Story 5 entered the marketplace and captured premium screens, families, and much of the broader event audience. The third weekend dropped another 53% to $8.25 million. Those are not catastrophic declines for a front-loaded summer thriller, but neither do they indicate the extraordinary staying power associated with Spielberg's greatest commercial successes. The movie stabilized over the July 3 weekend, falling only 30% to $5.75 million before earning an estimated $3.2 million in its fifth weekend. Its domestic multiplier currently stands at 2.5 times the opening weekend. Respectable, not sensational. As of July 13, 2026, the film has earned approximately $111.3 million domestically and $117.7 million internationally, producing a worldwide total just under $229 million. The balance is unusually even. North America represents 48.6%, with overseas territories supplying 51.4%. The United Kingdom leads the reported international markets with nearly $15.8 million, followed by France at roughly $9.25 million and Spain at about $7.48 million. That distribution protects the film from dependence upon one territory, but it also reveals that no single overseas market transformed the release into a runaway global sensation. This is broad support rather than explosive support. Now comes the uncomfortable arithmetic. The reported production budget was $115 million, while Variety placed the worldwide marketing campaign at approximately $80 million. A theatrical gross does not flow directly back to Universal and Amblin. Cinemas retain a substantial percentage, and the studio's share varies across territories. Industry estimates consequently place the likely theatrical break-even point near $300 million worldwide. At $229 million, Disclosure Day has doubled its production budget in gross ticket sales, but that does not mean it has already earned $114 million in profit. Gross and profit are not twins. They barely resemble each other. Theatrically, then, the movie currently occupies an intriguing middle ground. It is too successful to call a failure. A $44.5 million domestic opening for an original 145-minute science fiction thriller is genuine evidence that audiences will still respond to film crew-driven spectacle. Yet its present worldwide total leaves it short of the level required to become an obvious theatrical windfall. Remaining ticket sales, premium engagements, and later market reporting may narrow that gap, but the fifth weekend trajectory suggests the film is unlikely to suddenly develop blockbuster legs. The opening made a statement. The hold prevented that statement from becoming a revolution. Home entertainment will soften the equation. Premium digital rentals, purchases, television licensing, and eventual streaming value all extend a studio film's commercial life beyond theatrical grosses. Spielberg's name, the cast, and the movie's large-screen technical appeal also give Universal a durable catalog title rather than a disposable release. Exact ancillary revenue is not yet public, so declaring final profitability would be premature. What can be said is that the theatrical run created value beyond immediate ticket sales. It reintroduced Spielberg as a summer event director and demonstrated demand for expensive original science fiction, even without delivering franchise-sized numbers. That may be the film's most important commercial legacy. Disclosure Day did not conquer the marketplace the way Jurassic Park once did, and comparing the two would ignore how radically theatrical culture has changed. But it gave an original story a #1 opening, crossed $200 million worldwide, and turned a filmmaker approaching 80 into one of the summer's central box office attractions. Financial triumph? Not quite. Commercial embarrassment? Absolutely not. It is a qualified win whose meaning depends upon what Hollywood chooses to learn from it, and whether critics and audiences saw the same film when the lights came up. The most revealing response to Disclosure Day is not that critics generally liked it. It is that paying audiences remained noticeably less convinced. As of July 13, 2026, the film holds an 80% tomatometer from 414 reviews, compared with a 70% verified audience score. Metacritic reports a favorable 74 from 63 professional reviews, while its users sit at a much colder 5.3 out of 10. Opening night moviegoers awarded it a B cinema score, respectable, but hardly the euphoric grade expected for an emotional summer spectacle. Critics saw an old master recovering his blockbuster rhythm. Many viewers saw the same craft and wondered why the story beneath it felt so fragile. That divide looked unlikely during the first wave of reactions. Advanced screening attendees reached for enormous claims. Spielberg's best film in 20 years, Emily Blunt's most accomplished performance, John Williams' strongest score in years. Early enthusiasm focused on the thrill of watching Spielberg return to extraterrestrial science fiction without simply remaking E.T. or Close Encounters. The film appeared to offer everything associated with his popular peak: chases, humor, terror, wonder, filtered through the melancholy of an older filmmaker thinking about empathy in an age that treats it as weakness. The hype was intense, perhaps too intense. Once wider audiences arrived, admiration remained, but the coronation stopped. Positive reviews consistently praised the same elements: Spielberg's command of movement, Janusz Kaminski's luminous widescreen images, Williams' score, most of all Blunt. Rotten Tomatoes consensus describes her work as a career highlight, while several critics argued that Margaret does not merely witness wonder, she physically embodies it. Her comic timing prevents the film's mystical ideas from becoming solemn, and her fear keeps the extraterrestrial material rooted in the body. Josh O'Connor earned quieter praise for refusing action hero polish, while Colin Firth and Colman Domingo gave the argument over secrecy, competing forms of authority. Even critics unconvinced by David Koepp's screenplay rarely dismissed the performances. The action received almost equally strong notices. Reviewers repeatedly returned to the train sequence as proof that Spielberg still understands how to stage danger through geography rather than confusion. You know where the characters are. You understand what is approaching. Every new obstacle develops from the previous one instead of appearing because the scene needs another explosion. The Guardian called the movie consistently entertaining, praising its chases, humor, and old-school showmanship. Metacritic's review breakdown is unusually telling: 50 positive notices, 13 mixed, and no reviews classified as outright negative. Critics who resisted the film's philosophy still respected the person controlling the camera. Then comes the screenplay problem. Disclosure Day depends upon the belief that undeniable evidence can still create shared reality. Reveal the archive, broadcast the truth, and humanity will finally confront what its institutions concealed. Several critics found that premise painfully outdated. The Wrap argued that the film updates Close Encounters only as far as the 1990s, behaving as though society still trusts authoritative broadcasts and accepts facts once sufficient proof appears. In 2026, evidence can be labeled fake within seconds. People can retreat into partisan explanations, manipulated footage, or simple indifference. The film understands secrecy but underestimates denial. That is not a small logical crack. It sits directly beneath the climax. Other viewers objected to what happens after 2 hours of anticipation. The title promises disclosure, Yet the story spends far more time reaching the broadcast than exploring the social consequences once it occurs. Religion, international conflict, and human identity are introduced as foundations that might collapse, but the finale resolves many of those tensions through a collective emotional awakening. For viewers responsive to Spielberg's belief in empathy, the ending soars. For everyone else, it asks sentiment to perform work the screenplay has not fully earned. The alien presence also becomes less powerful once clearly visible. Even a favorable Guardian review observed that the unknown often loses force when given a concrete face. Mystery shrinks at the moment of confirmation. Audience responses reflect that split almost perfectly. Supporters describe the movie as moving, sincere, and unusually willing to argue that human connection matters. Detractors call it overlong, narratively convenient, and strangely naive about surveillance, social media, and institutional power. Rotten Tomatoes' audience summary acknowledges that the film wanders while praising its emotional reach, but individual reactions repeatedly question the 145-minute runtime and the simplicity of the final payoff. The B Cinema score suggests moderate satisfaction rather than rejection. People did not leave furious. Many simply left unconvinced that the revelation matched the buildup. The movie also entered culture carrying more baggage than an ordinary alien thriller. Spielberg publicly described it as built upon what he considers a foundation of truth, drawing attention to recent UAP testimony and his own belief that humanity has been observed. That sincerity attracted viewers already invested in disclosure movements, but it made skeptics examine the film's claims more aggressively. Some treated it as imaginative support for transparency. Others worried that Hollywood prestige was lending emotional authority to disputed mythology. The argument escaped the screen because Spielberg refused to hide behind just fiction. He wanted belief itself placed on trial. No stable legacy can be declared 1 month after release, and the major awards season remains ahead. Still, the critical shape is already clear. Disclosure Day is admired more consistently as filmmaking than as an argument. Blunt's performance, Spielberg's staging, and the technical craftsmanship have generated broad respect. The screenplay's faith in universally accepted truth has produced the deeper divide. Critics call that optimism humane. Skeptics call it obsolete. Both reactions lead toward the same final question. Is Spielberg's faith the movie's greatest strength, or the comforting illusion that keeps it from confronting the world as it actually exists? Disclosure Day ends with a single command. Listen. Not fight. Not believe. Not obey. Listen. After 145 minutes of pursuit, suppression, and technological spectacle, Spielberg reduces humanity's first public extraterrestrial communication to the most basic act of empathy. Margaret translates the word after Hugo's team brings an imprisoned alien into the television studio and broadcasts its existence worldwide. David Cope has explained that the line refers both to hearing the visitor and listening to one another. That double meaning is the movie in miniature. Humanity's greatest discovery means nothing if people remain incapable of receiving what another being is trying to say. Truth is the film's first great theme, but Spielberg refuses to treat truth as neutral information. Daniel believes evidence belongs to everyone. Scanlon believes knowledge becomes dangerous when released without control. Neither position is presented as intellectually empty. Governments really could collapse. Religions could fracture. Markets could panic. But Scanlon crosses the moral boundary when he decides that humanity must be protected from its own right to understand reality. His secrecy becomes paternalism on a planetary scale. The movie's argument is blunt and effective. Withholding truth may temporarily preserve order, but it also transforms the people preserving that order into unelected authors of everyone else's existence. The alien prisoner turns that political argument into a moral one. Humanity has not merely hidden extraterrestrial life. Powerful institutions have captured, studied, and abused it for decades. The image deliberately reverses the traditional invasion narrative. Humans are the species with laboratories, restraints, and classified rooms. The visitor is old, weakened, and physically exposed. Suddenly, the question is no longer whether aliens threaten us. It is what our treatment of a powerless outsider says about us. Spielberg has always used science fiction to measure human decency. But here he removes the comforting assumption that people will automatically occupy the innocent side of first contact. Margaret and Daniel carry another recurring Spielberg idea: adulthood as the recovery of something childhood understood instinctively. Both were taken when they were young, and both have spent years living around memories they could not consciously access. Their journey toward disclosure is therefore also a journey back toward themselves. Spielberg does not romanticize childhood as simple happiness. Childhood is the place where terror and wonder still exist without clean separation. Adults create categories: credible or impossible, safe or dangerous, human or alien. Margaret and Daniel must reopen the part of themselves capable of recognizing something before explaining it. The Guardian read this as Spielberg reclaiming the state in which rapture was still possible. Religious imagery deepens that idea without producing a tidy theological answer. Margaret experiences visions, performs acts that resemble miracles, and becomes a translator between humanity and a presence from beyond the known world. A witness even makes the sign of the cross after observing one of her transformations. Yet Kopp stops short of claiming that religious history was secretly extraterrestrial history. The ambiguity is more productive. Contact with alien intelligence and belief in God raise the same destabilizing question: what happens when human beings discover they are not the highest authority in creation? The film does not replace spirituality with science. It allows both to emerge from humility before the unknown. That humility is also where Disclosure Day becomes most vulnerable. Spielberg imagines that undeniable proof can interrupt geopolitical conflict and temporarily unite humanity through awe. Emotionally, the sequence works. Faces across the world stop, look upward, and share the same silence. Intellectually, it is harder to accept. Images can now be fabricated, reframed, and rejected almost instantly. Even a living alien on television would generate accusations of conspiracy, digital manipulation, and partisan theater. The film understands institutional secrecy better than modern disbelief. Its faith that common evidence can restore common reality feels beautiful, precisely because contemporary life gives us so little reason to share that confidence. Yet dismissing that optimism as mere naivete misses what Spielberg is attempting. He is not predicting exactly how 8 billion people would behave. He is staging a moral wish that wonder might briefly break the machinery of hatred. The threatened global conflict becomes insignificant once humanity understands that its borders occupy a tiny portion of a much larger universe. Corny? Absolutely. But Spielberg earns the sentiment through conviction rather than irony. He has spent much of his career depicting frightened people looking toward light. Here, approaching 80, he asks whether looking in the same direction might still create community. The film's official campaign itself frames disclosure as truth belonging to the entire human population. The finale is less successful when the alien becomes fully visible. Spielberg's unknowns have often possessed their greatest power before the camera explains them. The unseen shark in Jaws, the approaching lights in Close Encounters, the noises outside the house in War of the Worlds. The imprisoned gray is emotionally affecting, especially as an image of suffering, but its recognizable design cannot compete with the possibilities generated by Margaret's impossible voice. Mystery contracts once given anatomy. Even favorable critics noticed the danger of bathos when the creature finally appeared. The reveal serves the story's ethical purpose, though it weakens the otherworldly terror that made the journey so electric. Within Spielberg's filmography, Disclosure Day feels less like another alien adventure than a late-career synthesis. It combines the cosmic yearning of Close Encounters, the emotional communication of E.T., the institutional suspicion of The Post and Bridge of Spies, and the recovered childhood perspective of The Fabelmans. It does not surpass those films. The screenplay relies too heavily on its mysterious device, some secondary characters function mainly as ideological positions, and the conclusion reaches emotional certainty faster than its complicated premise deserves. But the direction still has force. The train chase moves with astonishing clarity. Emily Blunt gives the spectacle a human nervous system, and John Williams turns hope into something nearly physical. My verdict: 8 out of 10. Disclosure Day is not Spielberg's definitive statement on extraterrestrial life. Close Encounters remains stranger, and E.T. remains more emotionally complete. This film is rougher, more argumentative, and occasionally trapped by its own sincerity. That sincerity is also why it matters. It is made for viewers who can tolerate an old-fashioned belief that people might become better after learning how small they are. Its legacy will depend less on awards or box office totals than on whether audiences continue debating that belief. The aliens provide the revelation. Spielberg's real challenge is directed at us. After all the noise, fear, and certainty, are we still capable of listening?